All right, so let's look at the agenda. We'll talk briefly about legislative requirements, the field team process that got to this policy paper, new reporting requirements for 1718, talking about the program definitions. Okay, we'll kind of give a little brief overview of the alignment with WIOA, and then we'll dive deep into the COPS Pro enterprise data collection process and also talk about outcomes. And then we'll talk a little bit about data matching and launch board, and then wrap up with future changes and analysis, and then give you some resources that you can use based on this information. Okay, so jumping right in, August 1st report. Hopefully everyone has read that. That's on our website at the training yesterday. Not too many people have read that. Not too many people read the class report. Those are two critical documents for the future of AEBG and adult education in general. So I encourage everyone for pre-reading or post-reading to read those two reports. The legislative report that was sent maybe about 10 days ago was related to measuring effectiveness of consortia and aligning assessment of students. It also will help us with our reporting data for 1718. Currently, CASAS is following up on about 24 schools on the 1617 data, but for the most part, the other 325 schools have put in their 1617 AEBG data into TOPS Pro Enterprise, and we'll have that into the October 31st preliminary report, and then we'll do some data matching between TE and the Chancellor's Office MIS system, and we'll get those type of outcome numbers hopefully in the final report in March 1st. Then also the report talks a little bit about the alignment with WIOA and Perkins and other systems, and we'll get into that as far as tracking by program area rather than by fund source, so that encourages all that leverage and braiding that we've been doing over the last few years anyway. So here are the normal data requirements that you're used to. You know, adult served, and Jay's going to get a little bit into this, of what we mean by adult served. You know, 1 hour or more reportable individuals, 12 hours or more are participants, and there's significance to that definition and that split, and we'll go into that a little bit later. And then, of course, you have the regular improved literacy skills and high school diploma and high school equivalency, the post-secondary certifications and degrees and training, and then the employment. Also, what we added to this was transition to post-secondary, and one of the big things in the report is we're considering transition to CTE, any CTE, whether it's an adult school or a college, will be considered post-secondary. So that's one of the changes I wanted to highlight right off the bat. And we'll get a little bit into the other transitions that we're counting among program areas, and so that would be significant as well. And we'll be highlighting that later in the presentation today. So let's talk about the field teams. It was a short period, less than 3 months. I mean, started in mid-May, ended towards the end of July. There were several meetings, several teams. We did get the report to the legislature, I think by that first week of August, which was miraculous. And a lot of hard work went into that. So the three teams were the data and accountability team, the CTE team, basic skills assessment team. We had 35 field participants. I think it was split 12 from the K-12 county offices and 12 from colleges. Some were credit colleges, some were non-credit. As you can see here, we also had workforce development agency at the state level. We had labor at the local level. We had WIM director at the local level, as well as CDE and the Chancellor's Office, AEBG TAP. So 40 hours, 8 meetings, 8 weeks. Produced many white papers. If you can go online to take a look at those white papers, that's the source documents for the final policy papers. So if you want to dig deep into some of those policy changes that were recommended, you can go to the white papers and see where that came from. They're all on the website. We tried to be as transparent as possible, publishing the agendas when they became available, publishing the white papers as soon as they became available, at any changes and any notes. And so I think we had a very open and transparent process, which led to some really good recommendations. Okay, and then, so if you go to the website on AEBG and you click on, I think it's Adult Ed Framework or Data and Accountability, you'll get to the field teams, and see we list all the members. Some have their bios and background. There's the white papers and the agendas, and then there's the final policy paper. Okay, so let's get into the reporting requirements. This will be the first shockwave we'll be rolling out here. So all adult education students enrolled in ABE, ASC, ESL, or CTE programs enrolled at the K-12 adult school, community college, non-credit, and a third-party provider supported by the consortia for the purpose of providing training or supportive service. So let's go back and kind of dissect this and what this means. So we've kind of, although it's still 7 program areas, there's really, those main 4 big areas, ABE, ASC, ESL, CTE, and Jay will get into this a little bit further, but the whole pre-apprenticeship, workforce reentry, CTE, short-term vocational, really all falls under CTE. And so we haven't really defined the difference between those 3, and we had some conversation about this yesterday at the regional training in Mount Diablo, and so Jay can expand on that. Also with adults with disabilities and K-12 success, we have a little bit of clarity on adults with disabilities, and Jay will talk about that as well. And K-12 success is kind of still based on the legislative language, but we are collecting data this year to understand what that means. So then if you go down to the areas, K-12 adult school or adult education school, which includes county offices and adult schools. But where the big change is on community college non-credit programs. So reporting requirements, we will only track the data from those community college non-credit programs in those 7 program areas. So if you are at a college that is credit only, then you can still offer those transitional services and helping those students, but we won't be extracting that data, or you won't be reporting those data unless you have non-credit programs and enrolling students in those non-credit programs. So a little bit of a change there, and down the road, if you continue to offer those non-credit programs, and the credit programs, and some of those students aren't being counted because they are credit students, that could affect you down the road. But we want to give you the chance to digest this and, kind of think about it. We've got a new 3-year planning phase coming up. Hopefully we'll have guidance out in January, and you can start planning for, the impact of these policy changes and what that means to your consortia. So we still want to encourage helping students transition to credit-bearing classes, getting guidance, educational planning, transitional assistance, all those kind of things that help those students succeed in getting to degree-applicable coursework. But when they get into those degree-applicable coursework, credit, we're not tracking that. That's on the credit side of the house. So we'll be only tracking the non-credit side in those areas. So what that means is, as we track program areas only for adult schools, county offices, and non-credit community colleges, we're not doing like we used to do, which was touched by AEBG. We realize we can't track the fund source. Very difficult to track monies when it's being leveraged and braided with WIOA to a non-credit apportionment, in some places CalWORKs, Gale funding, Perkins, local control formula funding. And so we will be grabbing all students, regardless of funding, in those 7 program areas. So you don't really have to worry about whether it's AEBG funded or WIOA funded or Perkins funded. If they're in those program areas, we will capture them. Now, granted, some of those systems aren't in TE. Most of them are in the Chancellor's Office MIS system, but gradually we will try to, get access to those students if they're in our 7 program areas. So hopefully that makes sense. We encourage that leverage and braiding, and along with those other program areas, bringing on board, we have strong workforce, and if you're working with non-credit programs, we encourage the leverage and braiding there. On the college side, guided pathways, if it's related to non-credit. It would also have an adult ed component for the legislation. So we're hoping to see more leverage and braiding, and then we would extract those student numbers from the 7 program areas, regardless of funding. Moving on to the next slide. Okay, so for 1718, here's a mandate. All consortium members and providers will use TOPS Pro Enterprise. So I think everyone went through this process this year. Some people just got up to speed later this spring, and some are just still submitting right now or working with CASAS to submit their data. So when the next year rolls in and the first quarter is due at the end of October, we will expect to see all members that are receiving funding and providing services to students or instruction to be entering those into TOPS Pro Enterprise on a quarterly basis. That was the decision made. I know for some people in some programs, they're not going to see progress on that quarterly basis, but to be consistent and to look at missing demographics and other problems that you might have, we're mandating the quarterly reporting approach for enrollment and outcome. And then that includes just all the K-12 adult schools, county offices, community college non-credit, and third-party providers supported by consortia. And then lastly, AEBG office will use Launchboard to match adult ed data with MIS, which is the Management Information System at the Chancellor's Office, the EDD base wage file, which is Employment Development Department, and then the other data matching is the high school equivalency testing data with EED, HiSET, and TAF. We have some questions here. Can we still import from third-party vendors into TOPS Pro? Correct. Yes, I believe so. I mean, Jay, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, that would still be the same process as before. If you're using some other system, yes, you would use the same import-export from your third-party vendor.
And then there's a question regarding, can you explain leveraging and grading? So it's leveraging and braiding. Sorry, it wasn't clear. And so leveraging and braiding is just using other fund sources to serve the same student. So for instance, in adult education, we have students that need a high school diploma, high school equivalency. That's also the same requirement of Perkins. That also could be the same requirement in CalWORKS, requirement in AEBG, it's a requirement in WIOA. And so you can mix and match those various fund sources. Also non-credit might be, working with students to get skills to get their diploma or their equivalency. And so you don't just have to use AEBG, you can leverage the other fund sources that are serving that same program area. All right, so moving along. So this is just a reminder. So if you didn't like this slide about all members must use TOPS Pro and report quarterly, and we will be using Launchboard, and it's non-credit community college. If you didn't like any of that, and you choose not to follow the member effectiveness requirements and the annual plan general assurances that were just submitted this week, in fact, we did get all the plans in from 71 consortia, so congratulations, everyone. Your plans have been submitted. We're reviewing them and summarizing them. We'll include that in the legislative report, and we'll get out approval notices to you probably in the next few weeks. But if you choose not to report quarterly or not to use TOPS Pro or not to report your fiscal data or do public meetings and all those things that are required of members in consortia, you could be deemed ineffective, because everyone signed off on the annual plan, which also had annual plan general assurances, which were member requirements and consortium requirements. And so then we would follow the legislation about member reduction in spending. If you go to the Part C of that in the legislation, it says members that have been consistently and effective in providing services that address the needs identified in the adult education plan and reasonable interventions have not resulted in improvement. We also would include those member requirements in that. And so if we have people missing deadlines and things like that, we will have AEBG TAP offer you some targeted technical assistance to get you back on track, or maybe your consortia is seeing that you're being effective in the plan, and they will contact AEBG TAP for some technical assistance in that area. And so we'll document that technical assistance and those reasonable interventions. And if those don't result in improvements, then the consortia can reduce that member's funding, because we'll have that documented that we did try to assist and they still didn't result in those improvements, and then it allows the consortia to reduce the member's funding. So wanted to include that. We're going to be a little bit tighter on deadlines and due dates starting in 1718, because we do have the technical assistance provider that can help you. And so we'll be monitoring that with AEBG TAP and CASAS to see how that goes. All right. So, and then we have a question from Emma Neal. If a community college uses AEBG funding to hire a transition counselor to work with adult schools, will the MIS system capture that in the numbers served, or would Topsboro TE need to be used? So for 1718, all that data has to go into Topsboro Enterprise. Otherwise, we will not be able to count it. So hopefully that makes sense, Emma. No exceptions on that. If you don't put it into TE, it doesn't exist this year in 1718. And moving along to the next slide, programs, and I think, Jay, is this where you jump in?
Yes, I'm ready here. Okay, so I'm on adult education programs with the 4 little colored boxes. So I'll just start from here. This adult education programs, these are, what you might say are the quote-unquote big 4. For the most part, I don't think there was a whole lot of confusion over the past year about these, but we have ABE, ASE, ESL, and short-term CTE here. The definition, I won't read off the definitions. I think these are pretty familiar definitions, no major changes to these, but just kind of establishing we're talking about the programs, and these are the main 4 that probably comprise the majority of students for most of you. I'll go ahead and move to the next slide, to start getting into some of the issues for clarity. So the first one that has caused a bit of confusion and concern here over the past few months is adults with disabilities. So this is one that was discussed during some of those summer accountability team meetings. And so I think the big issue with adults with disabilities is looking at the different disability types. So for starters, if you're designating a program or class as adults with disabilities, we're talking about that specially designated class just for adults with disabilities. As you can see in the slide, not always, but usually that means it's a class specifically for adults with intellectual or developmental disabilities. So if you've designated a class that's serving those students and those students only, that's when you want to be sure to mark instructional program adults with disabilities. The second one are for students with disabilities, but who may be participating in quote-unquote regular classes like ABE or Career Tech Ed. In those situations, you would go ahead and mark the same program for those students as anybody else. So if you had a student who had a physical disability enrolled in your ABE class, they would be instructional program ABE, not instructional program adults with disabilities. But then at the student level, you could mark disabled under barriers to employment to show that that's a student with a disability. So for the top, you would mark as a class if you're designating it for disabilities. For, just individuals, you would mark that under barriers to employment, but not program. Okay, so for re-entering workforce, this one was probably an even bigger source of confusion than the previous program. I've got to say there's still a little bit of confusion about this one. We feel like there's a little bit more clarity we need to add to this before we can really say it's clear. but the discussions over the summer, for the most part, seem to look at, classifying that workforce reentry as part of CTE. So we're talking primarily about, the shorter-term CTE for reentry. So for the moment, what we're going to be doing is using those barriers to employment to flag those who are in a reentry program. The discussions have, referenced a lot of different learning populations that might have a need to obtain workforce reentry. So the specific barrier you might mark is going to be different depending on the type of student you're looking to service. But we're looking at, marking CTE, and then in the barriers to employment specify, exactly which barrier, that class is addressing, or if it's addressing a variety of barriers, you could obviously specify different barriers for each student depending on which one they actually have. I'll move to the next slide here. And I think one of the big areas of confusion is when this was established, this program was really intended to address adults who are 55 years or older. I'll say this program still includes adults who are 55 years or older, but over the last, year or so, it seems that this has kind of morphed away from specifying that older adult population and more toward working with everybody. Again, it includes those who are 55 years or older, but it's no longer limited to that. So, we'll be looking at date of birth. If they are 55 years or older, that will be recorded as part of this reentry population. But to be clear, it's definitely not restricted to those 55 years or older. It can be anybody with an issue that requires them to go back and reenter the workforce, and again, do a variety of short-term CTE activities depending on their specific issue.
Yeah, Jay, I just want to remind everyone that in the long run, and it's probably not going to happen this year, but once we get the data sharing agreements and tweaks to our data systems and all this, and we start collecting data and outcomes rolled up at the regional level, then the specific member type data collection issues are not as critical as looking at the outcomes at the consortia level as a whole. So if members are working together and your outcomes are showing your progress, we don't need to see, specific member did this or that. We need to see how the consortia did as a whole, because each member is taking on a role to support that. And some people do PD only, some people do marketing, some people offer instruction, some people offer supportive services. So taking that as a whole, we look at those regional components. But, we're still a little ways to go because we're just rolling out kind of system design and things like that. But think about that long-term goal that we want to get to eventually. And we need to get baseline data. We need to get a lot of things in place. But eventually that's where we're headed. I don't think we're going to get there this year because we haven't even collected baseline data. But just keep that in mind as Jay goes through some of this stuff.
Moving on now to pre-apprenticeship, which was another one that was, that caused some confusion. So this slide, has 5 bullets. I won't read it word for word, but this is providing some guidelines to follow on exactly what constitutes pre-apprenticeship. I think there's a little bit of confusion out there between what's pre-apprenticeship versus what's just plain old apprenticeship. And then there are, some very specific criteria that pre-apprenticeship programs should follow in order to be considered as such. I think the next slide maybe is a little clearer, where it's just talking about the DOL quality elements. But, there's, if you mark pre-apprenticeship, there should be some agreement in place where you're basically offering it in coordination with one of those approved apprenticeship programs, and you can see approved by the Division of Apprenticeship Standards through an MOU or formal agreement. So if you're offering pre-apprenticeship and marking it as such, you should have an agreement with a regular apprenticeship program in order to have it qualify as pre-apprenticeship. If you don't, that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't offer it, but technically it's probably, a CTE course or a workforce reentry if you don't have that agreement with an apprenticeship program in place.
good time to stop. We've got a couple of questions on the past slide, but also we had a question come up on pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship yesterday. So if you do have a state-approved apprenticeship program and you do have students that went through the pre-apprenticeship program and qualified for the apprenticeship program and are completing, you should record those for AEBG under CTE. And so we don't want to lose track of all those students enrolled in apprenticeship programs that are approved by the state Division of Apprenticeship Standards. So you would record that as a CTE program, but we would put those students trying to get into the apprenticeship program or the pre-apprenticeship for those elements that Jay described that would go under pre-apprenticeship. So Jay, let me read a few questions for you. Sylvia asked, doesn't each consortium member need its own TE agency number? Can one TE system handle two agency numbers? And what we said was everyone reporting to TOPS Pro needs a TOPS Pro ID, but you can help the other member report.
This came up in a couple different ways yesterday.
Right.
What I would say there is, and this seems to be a model that a lot of consortia are going to. So from a model point of view, I would say it's all good, as a lot of you are rightfully working on identifying who the TE superstars are in your region and trying to leverage their talents as much as you possibly can, so you have the TE superstar managing that rather than somebody who's brand new and doesn't know it so well. So if that's your approach, I would say fantastic. However, at the agency ID level, each member of your consortia needs its own agency ID. So if you have, Adult School X that's been WIOA 2 for 10 years and has a TE superstar, and then 5 miles down the road, you have Adult School Y that's never done it before and doesn't really have anybody that can be trained to do it, it's fine if you have that TE superstar from Adult School X manage your data and, use, her own computer to manage it. But ultimately, you'll need 2 separate agency IDs, one for each of those adult schools. And if it's the same person, that's fine, but they'll need a different login profile for their home agency than they will for the other agency. And that's simply at the state level. All members are going to need their own agency ID. We'll need to have that level of accountability to know at the student level and class and program level exactly which programs, classes, students, which activity occurred at Adult School X versus which activity occurred at Adult School Y. That needs to be done under 2 separate agency IDs.
Great. Thanks, Jay. And then Nancy asked, so this is related to the workforce reentry. So we only mark entering and re-entering workforce for students enrolling in short-term CTE and not other programs? So I think we're not clear on that. I mean, they're all CTE programs, so what do you suggest?
I think, so you're saying, so your example on the question is that you've got some people who are doing re-entry to enter into like ABE or something like that?
No, they've got people that are doing enrolling in short-term CTE. And so they're saying, so we mark only entering and re-entering for students enrolling in short-term CTE. And I think there's a CTE program in our 7 program areas, correct?
Yes.
So how would they distinguish between workforce reentry and the short-term CTE?
For now, we're doing that by using the barriers to employment. And so we're using partially the barriers to employment, and then we're also looking at, the date of birth for the 55 years or older. I would kind of revert back to what I said, is I think what we have now is probably not good enough. We're going to need something a little bit more specific in the data to tighten it up, because it will, overlap with other programs and cause a lot of confusion from other programs the way we have it. But just reading from the slide and what we have for now, you would go ahead and mark specific barriers to employment. That is to show they're in reentry because of this specific issue. So now they're, at the college or at the adult school receiving additional training so they can re-enter the workforce now that they're moving forward.
So they can make their own decision of what they, after reading the legislative definitions, they can decide whether it's a short-term
right. So I'll just say,
program
use
or
an
a workforce
example
reentry?
here. Maybe you've got a homeless population in your region, so you set up a workforce reentry class for homeless individuals, so homeless individuals can get what they need so they can get back into the workforce. So in that example, you would just go ahead and mark CTE, but you would make sure that the students would have homeless marked under barriers to employment to show that it's working on that specific population. And again, I think there's a little more we need to do to that, but for now, that's how you would do it.
Okay, and Barbara Lehman asked, do those short-term CTE classes qualify for pay points? That's the WIOA program, but I
No.
Clarify that? No. Okay, no. And then Kristen says, we're still distinguishing between CTE and other types of workforce prep, right? Which I would say correct, like computer literacy, career exploration, developmental activities, internships, all fall under workforce entry, correct? Or they could fall under CTE, they could fall under pre-apprenticeship. There's really no dividing line yet on those three CTE programs. I mean, Jay tries to do a pretty good job here with using the DOL pre-apprenticeship, and there is some specificity there. But when you look at workforce reentry, what Jay is saying, it's tied to specific populations. So if you have an older adult program specifically for workforce reentry, you could categorize that versus a general CTE short-term vocational program. Is that correct, Jay?
Yes. I do think that we'll probably want something that we can use to specify that it's reentry as opposed to short-term CTE. But for now, we're kind of clumping it more together. So, for what it's worth, leave it all as CTE and, use the barriers to employment to kind of specify who you're focusing on with that reentry class.
Right. And Annabella says, what qualifies as short-term CTE as opposed to CTE? Nothing. It's all CTE. I mean, there's no qualifiers there. So don't try to get too specific yet because we haven't. And so hopefully maybe by sometime later this year with data coming in, we can provide better operational definitions in the world of CTE. But for now, it's still going to be a little loose and, I don't know, kind of vague, right, Jay?
Yes.
Okay. So,
are there any other questions? Sorry, I'm keep having to ask you this, but I can't really see them from where I am right here.
Right. No, I think we're good. There's just some comments from Kristen, and then Andrew is working with Emma offline. And then Andrew said the key would be the non-credit is the key issue related to CT. So a lot of good information being shared in the chat. And so I'm going to move on to adult training to support child school success.
Right. So I would say maybe the reentry, we've got a good handle on what type of things we want to do for reentry, but the way we've got it set up in the data needs better clarity. You might say the support child school success is the opposite, where there's still a little bit of ambiguity based on our discussion at training yesterday on exactly who we're targeting in this program, but just from the slide and the data, I think this program is pretty clear in that we've got, that as a instructional program field in TE, and it's also an instructional program field in the community college MIS. So the systems, you just mark that as the program, and by marking that as the program, that will trigger, that they're in the child school success program. I'll just say there was a lot of discussion yesterday about a lot of different ideas different, agencies have on exactly what this means. Some are targeting parents, some are targeting instructors. There's different types of instructional programs that comprises the actual instruction. From what I know, I think a lot of these ideas seem fine to me. I'm not the decider on that, but I will just point out that there does seem to be a wide range of options here if you look statewide in terms of what agencies are implementing in this area.
Okay, and Diana is responding to Sharon's question, but because I don't know what Project Help is, so we'll let Diana answer that question. So moving right along to the next segment, which is in kind of an NRS WIOA overview that Jay's going to quickly run through. And
okay, I'll go through this.
Leading in
so here's where we're, we just spent, I'd say, the first half hour or so talking about all new things, Neil kind of going over some new statewide policies and then going over, redefining a few of those programs. Now we're kind of getting into the same old from what we were talking about, all last spring, is just the WIOA basics. So we're starting with NRS. When we're talking about WIOA alignment, we're primarily talking about alignment with Title II, which is adult education, and in particular for adult education, that is directed in many ways by the National Reporting System, or NRS. When we say NRS, we're talking about the feds. To be fair, the NRS really isn't the feds. They're contracted by the federal government to provide a means of regular evaluation for adult education nationwide. Trying to make a long story short, the way we were doing this from 1998 to 2016 was under the Workforce Investment Act, or WIA legislation. WIA was passed in 1998. It was, the long story short is it was that piece of federal legislation that put forth the federal grant dollars in exchange for the detailed testing and detailed data collection we all know and love today. In 2014, Congress passed the Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA. It was passed specifically to replace WIA. Making that long story short is on July 1, 2016, as scheduled, WIOA did go into effect and basically took over for WIA. So since July 1, 2016, we've been under WIOA, or the Innovation and Opportunity Act. And then the bottom bullet, based on the federal legislation, we're pretty much good to go with this through June 30th, 2020. That's just the length in which that legislation is intended to go for. I guess I'll just kind of move along here. I don't think too much else. I think we've kind of hit in the other things here. I'll move on to measurable skill gain as the next slide on this.
Right.
And so with WIOA, one thing on the hidden slide I'll bring up is I would say WIA and WIOA are more the same than they are different. But I would just say the big difference between WIA and WIOA is under WIA, there were the 4 title numbers. The title numbers tended to work completely independently of each other. Now under WIOA, there's a lot of mandates for collaboration, so a lot of you have been experiencing that with the MOU Phase 1 and MOU Phase 2 over the last couple years. Under WIOA, there's a lot of new requirements now where all 4 title numbers in each region are required to collaborate. So you might say under WIA, if you asked what the other title numbers did, most people would not be familiar with it. But now that we're in the WIOA era, everybody has a much better understanding of what these other folks are doing. So moving back to the slide, there's a there's a concept called measurable skills gain. So making a long story short, there are some WIOA-wide performance indicators related to wages, related to employment, related to post-secondary, and so on. One of the key performance indicators under WIOA is a concept called measurable skill gains. So you see we've got 2 indicators there, employment, wages. Another one is measurable skills gain. You see that listed in the lower left-hand corner of the slide, and all we're doing here in this slide is just showing, the incredible similarity between what the feds have mapped out under WIOA for measurable skills gain and what we have at ABG with the 6 AB 104 outcomes. Again, very, very similar, and I'll just point out that's not at all coincidental. We, are kind of going out of our way in ABG to use the same concepts that the feds have already defined in WIOA in terms of what outcomes are the positive outcomes we're looking for. I'll pause here now if there's any questions. If not, I guess I'll move on to the data collection.
Right. Looking good.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide with the quarterly chart. So this is giving the timelines. I guess I'll just start with the foot in the rail comment is when we're talking about state and federal accountability, we're always using the concept of fiscal year, not calendar year. That is, it's always July 1 through June 30th. So you can see the different quarters set up. So the formula is the same as last year. That is, the due date is 1 month removed from the last day of the quarter. So the first quarter goes from July 1 to September 30th. If you just fast forward 1 month from the last day of the quarter, that gives you the first quarter due date. In this case, October 31. So that part, I think, most people understand pretty well. The issue with this that did cause a lot of confusion that last year, that, something I probably don't think about as much as I guess I should, but just to be clear, the start date of every single quarter is always going to be July 1. When we were talking about this quarterly reporting last year, there was some confusion about, well, does the second quarter start October 1 or does it start July 1? To be clear, all quarters need to start July 1, and that's for the simple reason if we segment just that individual quarter, we're guaranteed to have all kinds of missing enrollment and pre-test but no post-test and all that sort of thing. For data, we need to include the year-to-date. So we're including the entire program year's worth of data. So we're including all the enrollments and all the updates and all the tests that are included in the system. If nothing's there, I'll go ahead and move along.
Okay.
Okay, so looking at the next slide for quarterly data. So real quick, we have now gotten to where we're upwards of 90% of the state is now on TE Online. So we're really happy. There's been great progress statewide with that. It was 50-50 a few years ago. I think we're over 90% online now as we speak here in August 2017. So the overwhelming majority of you, of course, do not need to submit anything because you're on TE Online. We can access your data automatically. But what we also require is a copy of the Data Integrity Report. The Data Integrity Report, or DIR, is kind of a catch-all data report. It includes state issues. It includes federal issues. It includes, items about demographics, instructional hours, pre- and post-testing, and so on. It kind of goes all over the map, covering lots of different data-related issues. So that's why we use it, because it's kind of a catch-all report that touches on lots of different things. We also require the DIR every quarter because it's a good way to kind of have each agency throw its hat in the ring. It's the submission is automatic, but we need some sort of signal from each individual agency to kind of let us know, yeah, we, the agency, have done everything we need to do for our data this quarter. So go ahead and knock yourself out, CASAS, do whatever you need with the data. The way we do that is by you sending us a copy of that DIR to signal to us that you're complete with that quarterly data submission. Moving on to end of year, the process is exactly the same copy of your TE data export, the same data integrity report, and then for end of year, in addition, we'll also require that ABG summary. I think we have a little bit on this toward the end, but there are those ABG reports in TE. There are some that are a little bit like the NRS tables. I'm not sure a lot of people really got a lot of benefit out of those. But we do have the ABG summary report that we think is very, very valuable. A lot of you have already started using that. That's the one that we think is the best for troubleshooting, whether your students do or do not have demographics, whether they do or do not have hours, and you can start itemizing out, how well your different students and programs are doing in terms of ABG outcomes. The bottom one has to do with data sharing, a lot more on data match later, but I'll just point out we will be doing a data match with EDD for employment. We'll be doing a data match with the Chancellor's Office for post-secondary, and ABG will also be participating in that data match for high school equivalency with that CDE HSE data match. Okay, any questions? I'll move on, I guess.
No, you're good. I'm moving to the next slide.
Some basic stuff here on the next slide. Document enrollment for all learners in the 7 ABG programs. Provide update for those who have 12 or more hours of instruction. And then pre- and post-test those learners who are in the WIOA 2 programs. That means ABE, ASE, and ESL. I'm giving some basic definitions of our forms. We have a form called the entry record, another called the update record. To be clear, ABG agencies are not required to use our forms, but they are required to document enrollment and provide update. There's obviously a lot of ways you could complete those requirements. One of several ways is to use the CASAS entry and update record. given that that's, kind of the default way. That's the way we present in training, but I'll just point out that there are other ways you could do this that don't involve these forms at all. A lot of you are doing that, and that's fine, but just to define the document enrollment piece, we define by our entry record, which includes, a bunch of demographics fields, gender, date of birth, and so on. It also includes a lot of program-related information like instructional program date of entry. This is the form that you can use to document enrollment, basically all of the things you need demographics and programmatically to record that individual's enrollment. Then the update record is just what the title suggests. It updates each learner's information. You're documenting enrollment, enrolling them in a class and a program. On the update, you're doing things like indicating the number of instructional hours, indicating whether they did or did not meet goals. Basically, you're just recording all of those outcomes that the student achieved as a result of their enrollment in your adult education program. And then finally, we have the test record. That's simply where you're recording answers to a single CASAS test and including information about that test form. So a few basics on the entry record. Obviously, we strongly recommend you need to record those demographics, gender, date of birth, race and ethnicity, and so on. And then there are some specific fields that are really good to pay attention to. Highest year of school, highest degree earned, you definitely want to mark that. Labor force status is another one to bring specifically to your attention. And then I'll also bring up a new field called barriers to employment. I've referenced it a couple times already in explanation of a couple of those programs, but the barriers to employment, to be clear, are defined by the feds. They were introduced as we transitioned out of WIA and into WIOA, but my take on it is it's the feds' effort to identify what you might call the quote-unquote hard-to-reach, hard-to-serve populations. So, anecdotally, the feds look like they're looking to try to make sure, first off, that all agencies in all states are serving these different populations that they might say are hard to reach and hard to serve. And it would seem, what's coming, it doesn't seem to be out there now, but they seem to be suggesting that over time we'll be needing to be able to show, our homeless students making learning gains equal to greater than everybody else, our displaced homemakers, getting jobs equal to or greater than everybody else. That is, at the state and local level, we'll need to be able to show that these different population groups are achieving the same outcomes as everybody else. The other new thing with WIOA is we're also looking to figure out which students may be cross-enrolled with WIOA partners. On the field 16 on the entry record is a field called personal status. It has WIOA titles 1, 3, and 4 listed. It's understood a lot of times you're not going to know this, so you can't record what you don't know. But if you already know that your student is co-enrolled with one of your WIOA partners to the maximum extent possible, we are trying to figure out, how many of those students might be in the other WIOA programs. Moving on to update, we have, for entry, it's very clear. You need to do that upon enrollment. Basically, as soon as the student sets foot in the door, that's what triggers the entry requirement. Updates are a little looser. We say complete after a substantial block of instruction. We generally say that's depending on how your agency is structured, based on your course schedule or academic calendar and so on. So, but if you're a trimester agency, for example, the suggestion would be to just do updates at the end of each trimester. That is, just align it to the way you're structured. In general, we don't think any structure is better than another. Semester and trimester are basically the same, achieve the same results. But what we do notice is it is best if your agency all does it the same way. It is good to get with your management team and make sure your entire agency is basically, doing this the same way. Okay, so
Jay, we do have a few questions. You can pause. Okay. So Nancy asks, please refresh me on what testing citizenship prep students need to do. And so if you're filling out the TE forms.
So to be clear, for SIT prep, I guess I'll answer it, but I'll be very clear. This is a WIOA 2 question, not an ABG question, but SIT prep refers to WIOA 2 EL civics, and the ones that you can get in SIT prep are the government and history test and the citizenship interview test.
Okay, and then so to record those into tops, is it pretty self-explanatory?
Yeah, I think we'll take that offline because we're getting way outside of what we're doing here. But to be clear, for most of you, this isn't really something you need to do for ABG. This question pertains more to WIOA 2 agencies, not ABG.
Oh, okay. And then there's a question for me. Is it possible, from Iris, is it possible for Chancellor's Office to add these questions from the entry record to the online application CCC Apply? And the Chancellor's Office is working with CCC Apply, but we're just starting to have conversations, so we'll definitely take that into consideration. But we're not sure, there are all kinds of modifications and sensitivity around that CCC Apply application. And so we'll see how it goes, but thank you for the comment, and we'll keep you posted on that. Bird does have a question for you, Jay. On the update form, number 8, all you want is a check mark indicating they've received services and no other data like how much and what happened?
That's correct. I mean, that slide is a couple slides away here, but the short answer is yes.
Okay, and then under the program status, the retained in program means the student is continuing the program, correct? If you mark retained in program, that's what that means. I'll just say, yeah, it's good to mark that, but that field for both WIOA 2 purposes and ABG purposes is no longer as important as it was in the good old days. There are no longer outcomes that are contingent upon students exiting or students being retained like under WIA. Okay. All right. And so we're caught up. Do you want me to go to the next slide, the test record?
The one that I have next is on update record.
Okay. Track learner progress and indicate results of instruction. That one?
The one that I show now is I have update records. I have update records. It's with the big screenshot. Includes many new fields.
Okay. You have a number on that?
43. Sorry.
Okay, that's not. Okay, so we're on the update record with the screenshot that has the top half of the form, so I'm going to stay there for right now.
Okay, so this is just giving, showing the field, so whether it's TE software or the update form or, other systems probably as well. Now that we're in WIOA, we've got lots and lots and lots of new fields. This is just a reminder to don't worry about the fact that there might be a lot of fields that may not apply to your agency and your students. Bottom line is to be WIOA compliant now, we've got to include all of the outcomes from all 4 WIOA titles, not Title II. So that's just a quick reminder. The next one down is probably one I should have brought in earlier, but the next one is on the short-term services, and as a couple of you mentioned, yes, that's update field 8. So we have supportive services, training services, and transition services. I'll also note that if you're not using the update, another resource is to go directly into the TE software. So you can see on the slide, you can go to records, students in program years. So number 1, I give you that specifically because that's where you can go if it's just easier to manually enter it into the software rather than use the update form. Anecdotally, this is one area that a lot of people have found it's easier just to go straight into TE and mark it rather than scanning or importing or whatever. This is one where I would say a lot of the manual entry has been done. So again, that's records, students in program years. And I also reference this because a lot of people have been asking for more specific examples. From an ABG perspective, there really aren't a lot of specific examples, but what I have been giving people, in the something is better than nothing category is if you go to that area in TE, there are 3 sections of the screen, one for supportive, one for training, and one for transition that give a little laundry list of checkboxes, maybe 8 or 10 different examples. So if you're having trouble distinguishing these 3 different areas of services, you can go to this screen in TE and at least look at 3 different laundry lists with some examples that might fall under these 3 categories. Some have found that, at least better than nothing in sorting out, which is which.
Hey, Jay, just a reality check. 30 minutes left, 40 slides to go.
Okay, so we're going to go into outcomes here. Okay. So definitions. So we've got the number of adults served. That's going to require 1 or more hours. And then attaining the milestones or outcomes, that's 12 or more hours. I think that's just reiterating what we did last year, but I know that there was some confusion with that. So when we're doing the item count, we're looking for 1 hour. When we're looking at those AB 104 outcomes, we're looking for 12 or more hours. Okay, so the next, we've got the 6 different ABG, AB 104 outcomes. So you can see there are the 6 right there. We've got the nifty little colorful, graphic there. And then if you prefer the straight laundry list, here they are: literacy skills, secondary, post-secondary, employment, wages, and transition. Those are the 6 areas of AB 104. So moving to adults with improved literacy skills, the primary way we're going to be assessing or doing literacy skills is through pre and post testing. We talked about that a little earlier. You want to pre and post test those who are in the WIOA 2 programs, AB, EASE, ESL. For non-WIOA programs, there is going to be a literacy gain awarded for that course completion. It's a little bit more than a couple years ago when we taught course completion. That is, we're looking specifically for that CDCP certificate. I guess I'll check with Neil. Is there anything else you needed to add to that?
No, it's just that we'll be defining the whole CDCP certificate, what qualifies on the non-credit side. I think we have a slide later about, I think it's workforce readiness, I want to say, about CDCP, but that's a big change too, and more information we'll have on that. So I'm going to move on to the next slide.
So improved literacy skills. So again, the main way is going to be through pre-post gains. You could also get a literacy gain through, again, that career development and college prep certificate. There's a new issue with high school diploma. There's a slide a couple of ways, so I won't get into the gory details. But the long story short is we've talked about that Carnegie units concept. There's not really enough agencies that use that, so we're kind of coming up with an alternative to cover that. But bottom line is if a student enrolls in a high school diploma program and they're at the 9th or 10th grade level upon enrollment and they finish the year at the 11th or 12th grade level, that's a way where you can achieve a literacy gain through high school credits. The feds approved this for WIOA, so we're basically adopting something applying that same concept for ABG. And then these bottom are 2 new ones that came out of the committee meetings this summer. There's a new one called occupational skills gain. That one kind of addresses that age-old question of, well, if we're not testing CTE students in those related programs, how are we going to be able to show that gain for those students? So the committee developed this new metric called occupational skills gain that will enable CTE and other programs to achieve outcomes in this area without necessarily doing the pre and post testing. Then another one is the workforce readiness milestone. This is not yet an official ABG outcome, but a lot of people on these committees had suggested this concept as something they're working on and we're strongly advocating for. So the agreement was there's a small coalition of the willing that's going to pilot this here in 1718, and then if it works well this year, it may become an official ABG outcome for 1819.
So Jay, just a clarification on that workforce readiness. We are going to start using it in 1718, so the flags are in place. I think there's a flag in TE and there's a CB22 workforce preparation course in MIS, so they should start reporting that. So it's not really exploratory, but it'll be new for a lot of people, like you said.
Okay. So starting with the pre-post gains, a lot of you know this, but just to be clear, that the pre-post gain is measured by the NRS charts or the federal charts. So the feds have carefully looked at all these levels and come up with 12 federal educational functioning levels, 6 for ABE, 6 for ESL. It may not be that clear on the slide. I'm not sure if it's easy to read, but just the same example I've been giving for years and years. Let's say you have an ESL student that scores a pre-test of 205. using this chart, that's going to place the student into ESL intermediate low, because you can see from the chart that's the level that covers the scores ranging from 201 to 210. So they place an ESL intermediate low. The way they would get that literacy gain is by getting a post-test 210 or higher. That is, they would achieve a post-test score equal to or greater than the high end of the high-end score for that level on the chart. This, to be clear, these are the charts we use at CASAS. Bottom line is, we at CASAS and all other test publishers that are approved for this basically are required to carefully align their system to the federal system. So these charts basically represent the way we've done that at CASAS. If you're using other test publishers, the concept and the federal levels will be exactly the same, but obviously the way the other publishers do their scores are going to be a little bit different, so the way you'd match their scores to these charts will be different. Okay, so anyway, here's a little bit more on that. We'll be using the diploma. We'll be looking at this progress towards diploma. So here's a real basic one. I guess we're hiding the details here, but we have progress toward diploma. So bottom line is, it's somebody at a 9th or 10th grade level to 11th or 12th. So there's basically 3 different ways you can record this. So you can, based on your high school credits, and again, just about everybody does that a little bit differently, so there's not really a good way to do this by marking the number of credits, because that's going to be different depending on each district. So what you would do, if you know the student is a high school diploma student, first off, obviously you need to mark instructional program high school diploma, and then you can self-report their instructional level as ASE low. That's basically you knowing through your own credit system that that student is enrolling as a 9th or 10th grade student. And then, on the update record, you would mark ASE high to show, when they enrolled, they were at the ASE low level, and then when they finished, they were at the ASE high level. That would be a way to document progress toward diploma, is they were ASE low at the beginning of the year, and then they finished up at ASE high. The final thing I'll say for this is you can also achieve this outcome if they actually get the diploma, obviously. So if they start at ASE low and they do one better than that, and they not only get to ASE high, but they finish the diploma, obviously that counts as the outcome the same. That's obviously a better result than simply getting to ASE high, so that will obviously also achieve that progress toward diploma outcome. But again, it's specifically for high school diploma students, and again, it's just to show progress through credits rather than through testing. And again, you just manually mark that they're ASE low at the beginning and then ASE high at the end of the year.
You might have already clarified this, but I'm just going to ask the question again. So Wayne says, is there any progress on high school students earning course credit as an outcome? So you might have already covered that, but if you could reiterate your response.
The course credit per se is not going to be the outcome, but if they earn enough course credits to move from 9th or 10th grade to 11th or 12th grade, then you could use that process as the outcome, yes. So it wouldn't necessarily be a course credit. It would be enough credits to move, from, the lower grade levels to the higher grade levels. That is ASE low to ASE high.
Okay, and then Rocky asked, can students passing high school equivalency with under 9th grade level still qualify for HSE attainment?
Yes, that's fine. That sort of student would not qualify for the special literacy gain outcome I'm talking about now, but by all means, if they pass the HSE, that will certainly count for the secondary HSE outcome.
Okay, and then last on this subject, they said, would they be looking for educational functioning level progress per quarter or at the year end?
It's just at the year end. I mean, whenever and again, it's a situational by agency, but if you know at your own agency the student has completed enough credits that they're out of 9th or 10th grade and into 11th or 12th grade, then you can just go ahead and mark ASE high on the update record or however you record it, and that will show they made ASE low to ASE high progress. Again, it's basically just creating the way for you to self-report that level gain rather than them achieving it through pre- and post-testing. So the bottom line is you would have some documentation locally showing that through credits the student, made that progress, and you're just self-reporting it, in TE to show that that actually happened to that high school diploma student.
Okay, and then there's a question on pay points that we'll have you take offline, and we'll have AEBG TAP send that to you.
Yeah, I'll move on to high school diploma HSE. So this one's pretty straightforward. We're just showing the 4 different things you can mark. Obviously, you can mark high school diploma or any of those 3 high school equivalency exams that are approved in the state of California for that. What I'll move on to next slide. It has literacy gains for adults with disabilities. So this is a little bit like the slide we talked about earlier, but if you have individuals with developmental or intellectual disabilities, you could use the POWER assessment series or the 2A to 5A series to record pre-post gains. So again, this has been another area that's generated questions. So for the specifically designated adults with disabilities classes for intellectual developmental disabilities, use POWER, use 2A to 5A. If it's an individual with a learning or physical disability that's enrolled in, again, maybe they're enrolled in ABE or CTE or one of the other programs, then those disability students would just use the regular tests that everybody else in that ABE class are using, or they would do the same skills checks that everybody else in the career tech ed class is using, and so on. There would be no need for them to do anything different from everybody else. Occupational skills gain, this relates to a concept in WIOA called training milestone. So this is a little bit like the high school credits in that you've got CTE students that might be doing a great job, but they haven't progressed far enough to get their occupational licensure or occupational certificate, or obviously to get a job yet, but they've made good progress. So this is what the committee worked on to come up with a way to document progress for those that don't have the job or the certificate yet. So what we're looking at is, it really is going to be determined locally as far as what those skills checks are going to be based on the specific occupation of study by that student. But if the student, pass a shorter term goal, maybe it's a special test, maybe it's a skills check, whatever your agency uses to record that progress, there's a couple, and we'll get to this here in a few slides, there's a couple boxes you can mark to basically show that that CTE student achieved an occupational skills gain. That is, they made great progress and completed some kind of milestone to show they've been making that significant progress. But again, in this example, they've made progress, but not quite enough to get their certificate or get a job yet. The other one, workforce preparation milestone. Again, we talked about this exploratory metric, but that's more for the short-term CTE. Maybe they're doing a 20-hour course on resume writing, or, they're doing, a 30-hour course on, how to do job interview. Usually it's addressing some sort of workforce readiness or workforce preparation activity. If they complete that short-term course, you can mark that as a workforce preparation milestone, showing that they completed that short-term course that's improving their skills in some sort of workforce preparation activity.
Quickly, if you could cover how to record that in TE, and then we'll move on to the next section.
We've got the slide here just showing you can do work-based project goal and training milestone for the occupational skills gain. You can mark workforce readiness on the entry record and then record training milestone or completed course on the update if you want to record that workforce preparation milestone. Won't get too much into that, but I can send you a couple charts via email, or you can download this PowerPoint to kind of, rather than try to commit this to memory. Moving on to post-secondary, I won't read every one, but here's a host of different things you can mark on the TE update record, one work outcome and several education-related outcomes that will record the post-secondary related outcomes here. Moving on to employment, the primary way we're going to be measuring employment, of course, is through that data match through EDD, but of course, because of the Social Security number requirement and really several other things, we know that the data we get from that data match is probably going to be limited. So in ABG, we're allowing self-report. So what we're basically just saying is you can mark get a job.
Jay, really quickly, sorry to interrupt, but we're on the post-secondary credential completion slide.
Okay, so this is basically giving you a list of criteria that will allow you to earn post-secondary. Sorry, I got ahead of myself. So it gives you, some different criteria you can use on what exactly is post-secondary. It's looking at a CTE metric. You can also maybe look at some things that meet the threshold for Perkins or perhaps Title IV student aid. So there's a variety. You could use that ETPL, which I believe, pertains to WIOA Title I programs. So based on the program you're looking at, you can use different metrics, kind of determine exactly what's quote-unquote post-secondary, but it should be that longer-term, clearly defined occupation-related course, again, meeting the different, meeting one of the different criteria you see on this list. And then, but we will also reiterate at the bottom, we're not necessarily looking at that short-term, like a, workforce prep or, OSHA hand washing or those sort of things. That might fall into that workforce preparation outcome, but it's not going to be, a full-on post-secondary credential completion outcome.
Jay, and remember yesterday, clarification for the slide that we'll be correcting for next week is it's for, at the top, it's for K-12 adult and community college CTE, not the high school CTE program. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is kind of what boxes to check for post-secondary
Okay, so I won't read all that off, but you can see a lot of things you can mark on that update form to record post-secondary outcomes. Again, probably best to just download this PowerPoint, rather than trying to commit all this to memory. But there's several things you can mark, some of which are, relate to earning degrees, others of which are, more occupational related, but several things you can mark that will get credit for a post-secondary outcome.
Okay, now we're on employment.
Okay, so we're on the one that's titled Employment and Wages at the top. Okay, so this is showing, again, the primary way we're measuring employment is going to be through data match. Again, we know because of the SSN requirement and really some other things too, that data is probably going to be limited. So we are basically going to be looking at, some self-reported outcomes, for employment in addition to the data match to try to fortify, those numbers and try to get a more accurate read of exactly how many of our students are getting jobs. The other thing I'll note here is at the bottom, the committee did come up with maybe some additional things we might consider data matching that are outside the WIOA metrics, things that might be more California specific. That's what those bottom 3 bullets are referring to. Okay, in the enter employment now, and so these are just the bubbles you can mark, to document those employment outcomes, get a job, retain a job, enter military. Again, this is all probably best just to download the PowerPoint to do that. And then related, there's also a couple things, where you can also self-report improved wages. That's done by marking either increased wages or got a better job. Okay,
okay, now we're on transition. Right. Okay.
So we've got transition again. That's nothing new. But what's a little bit new is we now have it broken down into 2 categories. One called transition to ASE. So that's, what you might call the internal transition, where a student is moving from ABE to ASE, or they're moving from ESL to ASE. For ABG purposes, that's now an official transition outcome. And then we have the transition to post-secondary. That's the one that's kind of a carryover for last year. But that's basically anybody who's in K-12 adult ed CTE or community college CTE and moving on to, we're transitioning to K-12 adult ed CTE, community college CTE, or community college for credit. If the students transition into one of those 3 areas, that can be counted as a transition to post-secondary. Okay, and then this is getting deeper in the weeds here, where you can go from X to Y. So this one is one that we probably need to clarify on the slide a little bit, but bottom line is if they're in K-12 adult education, ABE, ASE, or ESL, and they move to K-12 adult ed CTE, that's one way. If they're ABE, ASE, or ESL, and they get to community college CTE, that's yet another way. If they're ABE, ASE, ESL, and move into a community college credit course, that's yet another way. And then the final way that you could get transition is if you're in community college non-credit and you move to community college for credit. That would be the final outcome, where you could document this transition to post-secondary. From yesterday and the questions, the clarification point is with those first three that read K-12, ABE, ASE, or ESL participant, that also, I'll also note that also pertains to community college non-credit ABE, ASE, or ESL participants. So they don't necessarily have to be in K-12 adult ed, ABE, ASE, or ESL. If they're in non-credit ABE, ASE, or ESL, that would also count for these outcomes. They can move to CTE or they can move to for credit just like the K-12 adult ed students can. Transition to post-secondary, I'm not going to read them all off, but there's lots of different things you can mark to document those different transition outcomes. And then this one is hard to read, so I would just say email me and I'll gladly send you this slide or this chart. But what we tried to do is take a look at the whole, host of fields here and kind of color code them to try to show, all right, here's the ones that, count for employment versus here's the other ones that count for transition and so on. So it is really hard to keep track of all these different possible outcomes. So here's a little color-coded chart to try to show which specific outcomes pertain to which of those 6 areas of AB 104. And then I'll just keep moving here. Again, one more reminder about the short-term services. Again, any of those 3, outcomes from Update Field 8, or if you prefer, go to Record Students in Program Years in TE. Okay, so we're showing that we're doing the data matching. So, there's a couple areas, literacy and high school diploma. That's going to be self-report through TE only. These other areas potentially, will also be fortified by the data match. I'll leave it on that slide here. But just to be clear, HSE will be through that, CDE HSE data match that we've already done for many years. The post-secondary and transition outcomes will be through that data match through the Chancellor's office, and then the employment and wages outcomes will be through that data match through EDD. So I'm moving here to the bottom slide. This is another one that I'd be happy to email to anyone who requests, but this is just that color-coded chart with the 6 areas of AB 104 and just providing a brief laundry list of all the different possible outcomes that fall under each of those 6 areas. And with that, I'll turn it over back to Neil.
Okay, thanks, Jay. So with Launchboard, that'll be available in the spring. They're going to be reaching out to try to put things in place this fall so you can have access to the Launchboard tab, which will show all the data matching as of spring of 2018. And so really quickly, it's a comprehensive consortium member data, disaggregated program demographic and barrier information, includes about 57 student course taking and outcome metrics. They're going to be, like I said, testing it in the fall, hopefully available in the spring. They'll have some training to get you guys coached up on how to use it. Moving into some changes, and this is important, so don't log off yet. Supplemental data report. So Jay, at the beginning or towards the middle of this presentation, talked about those students that are reportable individuals. And so those are the students that are 1 hour or more but not meeting the 12 hours of instruction requirement. And so we wanted to look at what's happening with those students in that supplemental data report. So we'll be looking at students' outcomes, so those skill builders, those people that get those certificates less than 12 hours. We'll be looking at what happens to those students and putting that in a supplemental report. We'll also be looking at analysis of adult ed students that are being served in credit course college programs, because at the beginning we said we're going to be focusing on non-credit community college programs and on the college side. But we still want to see what's happening with those credit college programs and do some analysis there. We'll also look at emerging or effective practices related to immigrant integration in career advancement academies and other things. So look for that supplemental data report along with the regular data report, the preliminary and the final for 1718 that will deal with those students that you're reporting. And then changes to MIS and CCC apply. We'll be adding some data elements in MIS to align the management information system with adult ed requirements such as missing population flag, pre-apprenticeship, diploma, just aligning with all the things that we're collecting. And then they'll also convene a process, and I think this was Iris's question, on CCC Apply, and Andrew kind of chimed in on that and gave more information. But that will start that process starting this year and making it more useful for enrollment and data capture for non-credit and adult ed students. And then also we'll be doing a basic skills crosswalk. Probably in the next 2 months we'll convene a faculty and leadership team to build a crosswalk of the National Reporting System, NRS, educational functioning levels, and CB21 for levels below transfer. And then we'll issue guidance in the spring of next year to inform content and local alignment of courses and streamline student transition between K-12 and community college programs. So we'll look for that in the fall and hopefully the guidance in the spring. So as you can see, 17-18 is going to be a real interesting year on the college side. There's some things going on that we'll see if they bear fruit. Hopefully by the spring, a lot of these things will be out and available for you to review. And then lastly, for 18-19, and this, for a year from now, community colleges will use MIS to report students in non-credit ABE, ASC, ESL, and CTE programs. And then K-12 adult schools will continue to report the same programs in TOPS Pro. And WIOA 2 will continue to use quarterly data using TOPS Pro as well. So the only thing that changes there is if all the flags and changes go into place this year, starting the next year, 18-19, we'll be able to pull the AEBG adult education data out of MIS for the colleges, and it'll be a lot more robust data because some of the colleges are having some problems getting all that data into E. So we're looking forward to that. We'll see if that works. Also, pre- and post-testing using COSTAS will still apply to all WIOA 2 funded students, so that doesn't change as well. So with 2 minutes left, Jay, if you want to go over the resources quickly.
Okay, here. So the first one is kind of a catch-all, all kinds of different things from the ABG office, the beginning of year letter guidance. Most of this I think is on the ABG website. I'll also just point out, we have ABG tables. I think the one I highlighted earlier is that ABG summary. It includes, literacy gains. It includes all of the AB 104 outcomes, and it also includes those short-term services. So that's the one I'm generally suggesting is the best one to use to troubleshoot, data issues related to ABG. I guess I'm ahead of myself here on the slide, but here's a slide of that ABG summary, and it's kind of itemizing out the 3 different areas of report the 3 different areas covered on that report. Here's also a TE screenshot just showing you where to access those ABG tables as well as the ABG data integrity report. Switching gears here quickly, obviously it all starts and ends at the ABG website. So here's a screenshot of that with the link to the ABG website. I'll also, bring up our CASAS website with that, web address. I'll just point out that what we do like to do is we have a lot of special communities on our website. So the 2 that are worth bringing up is there's a California accountability page that has a lot of California-specific information for both California WIOA 2 agencies and ABG, and we also now have an ABG-specific web page that just focuses on different resources for ABG agencies. We also have the ABG Technical Assistance Program. This email address is if you need any technical assistance of any kind, you can email tap@abg.org. If it's something more appropriate for NEO or more appropriate for CASAS, they can forward it along. And then finally, here are some CASAS-specific phone numbers and email addresses that you can also use, which the one I'll point to your attention is that bottom one, abg@casas.org. So if you have ABG-related issues and it's really for CASAS, not for TAP or not for the ABG office, you can definitely use abg@casas as that email, and that's a good way to have somebody respond to your ABG-related question.
Okay, so what we're going to have, we had some questions towards the tail end because that is the end of our site. We did finish up right at 1:30 or 1:30 and 30 seconds, but we will have AEBG TAP follow up on the questions from the chat with Jay and I. And if you have additional questions from today that didn't make sense, or we rushed through it, or the slides were mixed up or something, you had a clarifying question, please email tap@aebg.org. And then also check, we'll be in Bakersfield on, Jay, is that Thursday
on the
next
24th,
week?
and yeah, Thursday, Friday next week is Bakersfield, and then Tuesday, Wednesday of the following week, that is the 29th and 30th, will be at North Orange Community College in Anaheim. So we kind of set it up, one north, one central, one south here before Labor Day, and then in late September we'll kind of get at it again and hit 6 or 7 additional sites. We spent 4.5 hours on the same material yesterday at Mount Diablo. So I would just encourage you to attend one of those. Obviously, having the full 4 or 5 hours to really, roll up your sleeves and get into the detailed questions is probably a better way of doing this than the hurried way we did this 1.5-hour presentation today.
Right, and there's still plenty of seats for those 2 upcoming events at Bakersfield and North Orange. So plenty of seats available. We encourage you to read the 2 reports. We also encourage you to look at the PowerPoint again. You can download it right now. It's also available on the website. AEBG TAP will be posting questions and answers relatively soon. They were at the regional training yesterday, and they'll take your questions from today, and we'll generate questions and answers. So we appreciate everyone for logging on. We had close to 90 people today, and so please tell a friend, get your data and IT people engaged on all these policy changes, and we look forward to seeing you in person at one of the regional trainings. I'd like to thank Jay and AEBG TAP for assistance, Veronica for behind the scenes, and everyone at AEBG TAP that maybe people didn't see today, but were helping us out. So